Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Bafun, and this podcast is an extension of my book, also called Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, and poetry on things like fatherhood, identity and belonging, growing up, creativity, and the lessons learned. The purpose of this podcast is to gain insight and learn from the journeys that others have taken. I explore the worlds of art, culture, design, business, creativity, and life from the perspective of Africans who are contributing to the redefinition of the continent and who we are. So my guest today is Janine Jellars. She's an author, editor, and content director. I took that from her bio on her website. She's the author of 2 books. We'll get into the books, but The Big South African Hair Book and When the Filter Fades, which is a novel.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Writing fiction. So like me, you come from nonfiction,
yes.
right? So you come from media. Spent a long time writing nonfiction. And then you go and write fiction.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Oof.
What was the difference for you?
I feel like we can speak about this for 5 hours, and especially because I'm speaking to another writer, so I think you will get what I'm saying, right? Like, I wrote the novel first before I wrote the nonfiction. I wrote it as a creative exercise. I wrote it to see if I could do it. I didn't feel at the time like, oh, I'm writing a novel for publication. I felt at the time I was in corporate. I was spending 95% of my time in meetings, leading teams, doing strategies, and I felt very removed from my identity as a writer. And I also realized that no one is holding a gun against my head saying, you can't write. No one is holding my laptop hostage, that I could literally at any time decide to pick up, whatever story I wanted to tell and write. And that's what spurred me on to write the novel. And I just did it. And it was a scary process because, as you rightly say, as someone who was a journalist who knows how to report, I know how to interview people. I know how to fact check. I know how to put that structure together. I'm very comfortable with that. Writing fiction is literally you, your laptop, your imagination against the world. And it's scary to world build, and it's scary to also put it out into the world and know that it's up for interpretation. And unlike nonfiction, in the nonfiction realm, if you put something out, people can debate you on the facts. And as a trained journalist, I'm comfortable debating the facts, I'm comfortable pushing back and saying, no, but quote, let me play the tape. Let me run it back. This is what this person said. This is how I came to this piece. Whereas in the fiction realm, when I put out the novel, I was, listen, my therapist could give you, all the ways that I was so anxious about this project because it was so open. It's so open to interpretation, and I can't debate the facts. So if anyone came to read my novel and say, no, but this doesn't make sense, it's not a fact-based conversation. It's up for interpretation. And being in that gray area of the fiction world was very anxiety-inducing for someone like me who loves control.
It's like being able to, because it's not based in fact.
Yeah.
Somebody could debate your choices.
Yes. Or the interpretation of my choices.
The interpretation of your choices, and being able to let go. Because I've been wanting to write fiction. My whole thing is, so how I do things is I end up reading stuff on how to do stuff.
Yes.
Right. So I've read countless books on writing fiction.
Yeah.
And watched, videos and all of this on writing fiction. And I think there's an element of letting go that I personally haven't kind of got to yet. I did one short story. So I have like one short story done in my life. But knowing that when you do that, you let it go out into the world.
Yeah.
I suspect it's slightly easier for me because of poetry. Because I had to learn that when I was involved in poetry. That people will interpret it how they interpret it, and I can't control that.
So I think we are the same in many ways, in that one thing that was holding me back from releasing this book, or one of the points of anxiety, was the fact that I felt I hadn't paid the dues to call myself a novelist. Even in conversation with my publisher, I had that anxiety. I was like, I haven't read the books. I haven't mastered story structure. I haven't gone. Should I just quickly go and register for a master's in fiction and creative writing at WITS? I'll do the 2 years and then I'll come back and we can publish this book. I had all of those things. Like, what right did I have to put out a novel as someone who felt I hadn't done the hard yards of studying story structure, So I had some of those same kind of anxieties, like, oh my goodness, have I included this trope? Is this the correct way to build a narrative? Because I am also obsessed with the process and understanding how the sausage gets made and knowing the engineering behind the thing, But I think that can also be a cage.
I mean, the irony is that when you delve into it, few people have actually followed the route that whether it's academia or society says, oh no, to become these are the steps that you must take. Then when we look at the people that, we admire, or the people whose work we follow, yes, some of them have followed the path, but a whole bunch of others literally did not. So, I mean, I ended up in media just because I always wrote.
Yeah.
Like, I come from an economics and marketing background. You, on the other hand, it seems like that's the space you always wanted to be in.
I took those steps.
So you grew up in Cape Town?
Yeah. Cape Town, girl, born, bred. Yeah.
And then, at what point do you say, I want to study this?
Felt like I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. I grew up in a household where we would watch the news together when news was at 8 o'clock. Wasn't it? Yeah, it was 8 o'clock. We'd all sit around and watch the news. My mother would bring home the daily newspapers every day. We'd all read sections of the newspaper and pass it around. Every single Saturday, we were in the library pulling 4 books. And the expectation was you're going to read those books and next week we're going to get 4 more books, So I grew up in a reading household, in a household that consumed the news. I was always interested in that ability to build a world with words. I'm the youngest of 3. And so my eldest brother, or my brother, is 18 months older than me, and my sister is 7. Did I get that right? 8 years older than me. And so I started reading quite young because I was mimicking everything my brother and sister did. So from the age of 4, I was reading. And I remember I wrote my first little story when I was probably about 6 or 7. So it's something that I felt I was always going to do, We also, I mean, I was born in the 80s. So it's also the time of titans of media, It's like you watched Oprah every single day. You saw these powerful women in media. And I think also being at a pivotal time in my kind of childhood development when we were undergoing a transition in South Africa, you see how things are changing. You want to understand the world, and you're seeing how people are able to tell stories and move the thinking around what's happening around them through things like media. And that to me was so incredibly powerful. So it felt to me like a foregone conclusion that that's the route I'm going to take. So to me, there was no other option. I was going to go to whichever university I was prepped to go to, but inevitably it was going to end up with, journalism on that certificate. I ended up going to Stellenbosch. I did my undergrad in international relations, and then I did the postgrad in journalism there. And also I've come to understand these things about myself, but I'm very type A. So when I want to do something, I want it to be of quality. I want to do it, So when I thought about, okay, which university, which program, it's like, okay, what is the most competitive journalism program in the country? Oh, Stellenbosch only admits 25 people a year. I'm going to be one of those 25 people. And so I took a big bet on myself, and that's what I focused on doing. And that's what I did.
Was it journalism? So I'm a writer. I don't consider myself a journalist because of how I came into this space. And I've had conversations with, for example, Lerato Shabalala. And we have a similar view in terms of how we see ourselves. I think me more than her, because my background is totally unrelated to putting words down on the page. For you, and I've always said, I'm not the guy to go into, to do court reporting or to go on the ground and deal with, write about tragedy and interview people. I'm happy to stick in my lane.
Yeah.
But for you, was it journalism in its entirety, or did you have a particular idea of where you wanted to end up?
So it was definitely journalism. It was, I wanted to be on the ground. I wanted to be interviewing people, telling stories, that kind of thing. I had these visions of being the next Christian Amanpour. That was kind of what I was thinking, So yeah, because there are very many inroads into the world of media, but I wanted to go that route. And I spent exactly 1 year in a traditional newsroom before I was like, this is not for me. You can only knock on doors of grieving families and interview them fresh out of hearing about what happened to their family members for that long before it really does something to you psychologically. And I was like, that is not for me, And other parts of me that I always love to interact with is I love telling women's stories. I love platforming women's stories. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm swapping this out, the court reporting, the crime reporting, getting the lawyers' letters from XYZ political party. And I'm going into women's magazines because that's where I can tell women's stories.
So that was conscious.
Yeah. That was also pre-Devil Wears Prada, where, women's magazines was not thought of as what it wasn't. Because I think Devil Wears Prada definitely changed how people viewed the world of women's magazines. And it changed even the perception of people who were entering the industry. Yeah.
So the thing that always fascinated me when I started kind of getting into magazine was the fact that, in this country, I'd say at its peak, magazine was generally ran by women.
Yeah.
Across the board. I worked for Destiny Man. I always tell people Destiny Man was a men's magazine created by a group of women.
It was, women-dominated industry. And I loved working in spaces that were, most of the newsrooms that I was in, working in women's magazines, I think I worked with 2 men my entire time, And that's all the way to the top.
Yeah.
And I loved that, to be quite honest with you. I loved working in women's spaces. I loved, telling interesting stories about women who were doing fascinating things in the country, because I think, again, the perception of what constitutes women's magazines was definitely skewed by, Devil Wears Prada and all the fuss around that. But I was going and interviewing women leaders. I was going to rural Eastern Cape and speaking to women teachers who were building schools, I was speaking to women in faith communities about charismatic and pastors, and all kinds of stories that I think didn't find space in traditional news media. So it wasn't all going into the fashion closet and getting Chanel shoes for the weekend.
Who comes to mind? You've given examples, say, going to the rural areas. I meander a lot in this thing. I'm sure you know, because I also meander a lot in general. but you're talking about that, is there someone, or are there women where their stories have stuck with you and become, let's say, inspiration or motivation for the decisions that you have made past the point that you interacted with them?
Oh, the entire time I spent working in women's magazines was incredibly formative for me. But I think what was very important for me, because I entered that space when I was about 21, 22. And my first kind of big job, I worked at Fair Lady for 4 years. And it's not even about the stories of the women who I interviewed, but being in that environment has shaped so much of how I think about, even my responsibility as a writer, everything from that to how I lead, to how I see intergenerational conversations amongst women. I don't have a lot of, you see people have conversations, or you have conversations with other people and say, oh, working with a woman boss is so terrible, or, working in all women's spaces. And that does not, as someone who spent a lot of time working in all women's spaces, that absolutely does not resonate with me, because my experience of that cross-generational conversations with women is completely different. I felt very protected, and I felt very supported, and I felt that, I got a real understanding of what it means to be a woman and like navigate the world.
I think that was important. I mean, you went to 17 magazines, so now you've gone through this journey, and you're now responsible. And I understand the nuances and the drama and the politics that we deal with in these spaces.
Yeah.
But now you are older, and you have a responsibility in terms of the messaging that you're sharing with younger women and young girls on a title that is still kind of Western influenced.
Yeah.
And kind of, Caucasian or Western or white led context, lens, etc. How is navigating that?
Oh, hot topics.
You don't have to say names.
Personally, it was tough. It was tough because I was having this conversation the other day with someone as well, when I spoke about being part of a generation or being part of a cohort who went into these spaces, and you are there to fulfill your mission as an individual, whether that's like just going in to do your job, collect your check, whether that is, doing mission or purpose-led work in communicating to younger people, whatever that mission is, it's like your individual mission. At the same time, you are in your 20s and you are literally part of desegregating a space, and I think for many people in South Africa, we take for granted how short that time span was. Like, I think it's become more clear to me now as I'm looking 40 dead in the eye that 30 years, we're now 30 years post 94, 30 years is nothing. It's a blink of an eye. And if you're talking about that specific time in those media spaces, I mean, I entered my first newsroom probably when I was, it was about 2004, 2005. And we're talking 10 years post 94. And then you're talking like 5 years after that. And 15 years post 94, you like 20 something, going in to do your job. But at the same time, you are also dealing with like the macro issues at play. And I don't think we quite understood. And when I say we, I mean that kind of cohort of women, at the time who were in media, in these big kind of publications at the time. We didn't quite appreciate the amount of pressure that was put on us, to be excellent in all ways, unimpeachable in all ways, deliver regardless of, because if you fail, it's not even the case that you were the first one or the only one at this table. Like, there's not going to be a second one.
Yeah. I mean, there's this book, How to Be Anti-Racist.
Yeah.
And he talks about how literally representing your people, whether it's race, whether it's culture, whether it's nationality, versus being an individual messing up. And it's what you're talking about. So, you get a foot in the door. If you mess up, it is your gender, your cultural background, your race, etc. That is used to kind of paint that entire, the entire group, however you want to define the group. Whereas somebody else, it's just that person messed up. Or that person is a mess up.
Mm.
And that, which is like you're saying, and I mean, I think in certain spaces still in this country and across the world, it still
holds true.
It still holds true. It's like the idea of Black excellence, like the exceptionalism. Like we have to hold up. Somebody else wrote, I can't remember what I was reading, and they're talking about Black filmmakers being able to make shitty movies. You know, it's like we see lots of crappy movies.
Scorsese does it. Tarantino does it.
From a wide range of people, but somehow it must be excellent. And then that one excellent is then held up and kind of everything else is pushed to the side.
100%. So I think looking back, obviously hindsight is 2020, but looking back, you kind of just think like there was this group of women who were in their 20s doing, you know, what they could, but they were being held to an absolutely impossible standard. You know, whether it was myself, whether it was Lerato Shabalala, whether it was Sbu Mbongose, whether it was, you know, any number of other women. And again, we're talking a time frame that was 10 to 15 years post 94. When, I mean, now we are 30 years post. I don't think we still don't have a clear vision of what South Africa is or what we want to be building South Africa to be. How much more so then?
So hindsight is 2020, but I also believe like the beauty of hindsight is sometimes you have to go through things to get to a particular point where you found an element of peace. Yeah. Or an element of clarity.
Yes.
What have you carried from then where now today it's like you are where you are as what did you say? Building project manager housewife. Or not necessarily a housewife because you're also an author and you also do things out in the world. But, you know, would you have been able to get to here and find whatever level of comfort you have today if you hadn't gone through?
Oh, no, I'm 100% a believer that, you know, you are a culmination of all your experiences and you need to go through everything to understand. I mean, I don't know what tomorrow holds. None of us do. But I think the lessons that I've picked up through my time doing all manner of things is definitely going to spur me on to whatever the next is, right? And I think even this novel is so inspired by my time in magazines. I would not have been able to write this. And I think one of the best compliments you can get as a writer is people feeling that it is 100% believable, lived in, accurate, you know, it feels very true to the world that I created. And I would not have been able to build that had I not lived the life I've lived.
It also seems to balance between, let's say, you know, your first life, your first professional life, and then because you transitioned, it felt like seamlessly from kind of media in one form to digital, social media, etc. Yeah, and it seems to kind of bring those two worlds together. Yeah. So for some of us, well, I guess for a lot of people, not just in the media, but that transition was particularly difficult because you had a lot of people who saw the world a particular way, and now it's going, we need to actually break all of that stuff down and to a certain extent start from scratch in terms of how we view this thing called media. How easy was it for you?
Strangely, very easy. I'm a quick study. I learn very quickly. I pick skills up very quickly. I throw myself at challenges all the time. You know, I think that we live in an information age. One thing about being a journalist is your ability to consolidate information very quickly and understand things very quickly. You can give yourself master classes in almost anything. You have to go and interview the minister of whatever now. You know, so you hone that ability to say, okay, let me go and research in 10 minutes. What are the talking points I need to develop for this interview? So I use that skill in my daily life all the time. Oh, I need to understand whatever this new thing is in front of me. So I'm able to metabolize new information very fast. And when I was like, okay, what's my next after magazines? What my core skill is my ability to write and tell stories. And I think that's a transferable skill that works in all media.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to the digital world, yeah, there were one or two technical things I had to learn, because it's a different format, but that's nothing that I couldn't teach myself. And so I threw myself at that challenge. It's just kind of a blessing around how my brain works that I can, just pick things up fairly quickly when I apply myself, which also why I went to study business, contrary to everyone's expectation of me, because I was like, okay, I want to do this. I want to figure it out. It's not enough that I just know how to make money. I need to know how to theoretically apply information in terms of how to make money.
Found this fascinating. So on your LinkedIn profile, when you went to study, you have it listed there as career break. So most people go, I mean, in this era of MBAs, and now because it feels like everybody has an MBA,
hi,
people are chasing
everyone?
PhDs. I don't know, like I've watched from, let's say, late 90s, early 2000s when people started kind of doing MBAs. And at the time, very few people had one. And then there's been this, maybe also because the wife worked for 2 business schools. So I watched kind of the MBA classes evolving and growing. And I seem to be surrounded by so many people with MBAs, although I never went and actually got one. But, people will study while working. Right? So you will know, if you know them like socially, or if you meet them kind of face to face, very quickly you'll find out that they're doing an MBA. But if you follow them on, look at LinkedIn or you look at their CV and stuff, it's not in there until they have it.
Yeah.
Whereas you were very deliberate and you went, this is my career break.
I'm pivoting now.
This is my career break for, my development.
Yes.
What prompted that?
I'm not a typical MBA student or MBA graduate. Very few people with our profile end up there. And I think, going to specifically the school I went to, shout out Gibbs, it's very rigorous.
The wife worked there for a while.
It's very rigorous. It demands a lot. It's an incredibly demanding course. I was also just, to say over-index is incorrect, but it's a school where mostly finance people go. It's a CA, driven, finance-driven business school. I thought in matric, when I put that pen down after that higher grade maths exam, I thought, see you later. I'm not doing this again, Haha, lol, joke's on me. So I found myself as like one of 3 people from a humanities background in my class at Gibbs, in a room full of CAs and engineers. And that takes a different level of like focus, it's an opportunity I wasn't going to pass up. There are probably other schools I could have gone to that were less pressure or that are more focused on kind of lifestyle, as they put it, in the industry. But I wanted, again, me being me, type A, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, At some point, my husband was like, are you sure you don't want to go do it in the US? I'm like, do a GMAT. No, thank you. So what is the most rigorous course I can do here? And it was the Gibbs MBA, which required focus, dedication, and it required me to do things I'd never done before. Like, in the course, they say what brought you here isn't going to get you there, So for me, I needed to take that break and I needed to really focus. Again, they also say there are rubber balls and there are glass balls. The rubber balls will bounce back your career, your, whatever job it is you're doing now. your hobbies, your weight, because I put on like maybe 10 Ks over those 2 years. Those things will bounce back. But the glass balls, your family, your mental health, those are tougher to pick the pieces up later. So I made the decision, career break, focus, and, we'll pick it up after.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us. What was the objective? My father had this thing which is why I've never eventually, I'd always planned to do not an MBA, but a master's. I wanted to do a master's in economics, and I had a whole plan. And after varsity, I was working with my father in Lesotho, and I had this whole plan. Even where I wanted to go study, what it was the year 2000, because in high school that was the thing, right? So in high school, because I became a teenager in the 80s, would sit around and go, because the year 2000 seemed so far away. Like we would sit around and the conversations were in the year 2000, I'll be doing, I'll be married or have a house, and it seemed so far away, and then it came and went. But my father, who was an academic and guided my career to a certain extent, always used to say, only go study if you know why you're going to study that thing. And the reason why I've had opportunity, I think I've talked about it before, like I've had opportunity to access these things because of, my wife worked in certain spaces where I built relationships. I could walk in and relatively easy do the thing, but I could never answer the why in terms of, okay, so what my life looks like today, why am I going to do an MBA? Like what? Okay, great. So I have that after my name, or I can show that I've completed this thing. What's it going to do for me?
Yeah.
What was it for you?
Multiple levels. It's something that I felt I always wanted to do. So it was always kind of at the back of my head. And again, if I've ever said I want to do that, it's going to bug me till my grave. I need to do that, So that's like the one level. The second level is like, if I can do it, why not, So, but then if you want to know the real reasons, I had started a master's before. I know I needed a master's. I had started a master's before, a master's in journalism, and I felt that it wasn't answering my questions. It felt very repetitive to what I'd done previously, and I felt that this isn't adding to my skill level at all. So I'm going to do more of the same and research this thing, and then what? It just felt like if I'm going to spend the time and the money, I wanted to be impactful on my thinking. So it's wanting a master's, like a feeling that I needed that skill added to my kind of quiver of skills, And then the practicality of an MBA over other master's programs, just being able to do certain things that I hadn't done before, or having access to certain knowledge that I hadn't had before. Now, don't tell me about Excel. I'm that girl now, Whereas before, every 5 minutes I'd have to Google how to do a certain thing on Excel. So it added to my skill level in terms of that, like being able to analyze financial statements, being able to have conversations in business that are driven by a shared understanding of how do we make profits? What's the revenue model here? So that to me was like very interesting, and I felt like I needed that, to be a better rounded communicator and business person, etc. So that's like the one layer. Then, I first started managing people when I was 25 years old. And I think too many people find themselves in like management positions because you're good at the thing that you do.
Yeah.
So you go from being like a specialist to a manager. And that happened to me very quickly. I do have an affinity for management and leadership. Like I like doing it, and not for status reasons. I like doing it because I like sitting with people, and I like seeing how someone goes from having, one level of skill to now having another level of skill. And I like seeing that transition and being a part of that story, like mentoring them, training them, etc. But I wanted like a deeper understanding about what my leadership model was. Like, how do I lead and how do I lead better? Like, so for me, it was also that leadership development aspect to it. And then the third part is, and again, this is very MBA to speak in threes, but the third part was definitely about creating a differentiation for myself in the job market, because so few people with my background have that qualification. So I felt like, okay, how am I going to be different to everyone else who's done these things? So it just adds another dimension. Of course, I want those board seats one day, so it adds to that. And then PhD is definitely another ambition for me. Yeah. And being able to teach. I'd love to teach more I'd love to teach what we do as communicators, as media people. I'd love to teach what we do in a business context. Not for other media people, but for people who make business decisions.
I mean, and it's important. I mean, that's the bulk of my work these days.
Yeah.
Bulk of my work is corporate.
Exactly. So that was a lot.
Yeah, okay? But let's start with it was interesting for me when you talked about, so the teaching I understand. I also, like, I have an affinity for academia, but I think it's because my father, like, he was a born teacher and always wished that, even though he went into business and that's how I ended up in kind of entrepreneurship, a part of him, I think, always wished that I became a lecturer. Yeah. So I get that, and I get the kind of that journey in terms of, you know, you've got your honors, you got your undergrad in one thing, you've got your honors in another thing, you've got an MBA, being able to build on that with a PhD. What was interesting for me is when you talked about how it positions you in the job market. Whatever happened to your business?
Hey, listen, there are very many ways to skin a cat. I feel that, how do I put this without jeopardizing myself? No, I
asked that saying I'm not one of those people who believes a certain thing is the answer. So entrepreneurship and small business is held up as this thing. I was raised by an entrepreneur and I've worked for myself most of my life, and it is hard and not everybody's built for it. So I'm not asking with judgment or any kind of thought behind it. It's like, I'm just curious because I remember you going through this transition and then ended up in agency and then
doing it myself,
working on projects, and then all of a sudden you're doing it yourself.
Yeah.
And then here we are today and you're like,
I want to position myself more into a corporate person. You would never work harder than when you work for yourself. Let me make that absolutely clear. And I'm saying this as someone who has been put through the mill of Gibbs Business School, you know? Like, working for yourself is another kind of, you know, it is tough. It is, and it was tough for me in ways I hadn't expected. Because I'm not a natural salesperson, I thought that the finding business, getting business, closing on deals was going to be the tough part. That was the easy part for me. I made very good money. The tough part for me was the emotional part of like managing myself through very difficult times. And not difficult times that are like, there's no work. The difficult times are someone is sitting on R500,000 worth of invoices and they're telling you for like the third week in a row that the person who's supposed to do X and Y is on sick leave.
Yeah.
And you there like, I need to pay my suppliers. I need to pay myself. Like, what is the plan here? You know? So working for yourself is incredibly tough. And I think so many people are like, oh, get more people, get an office, build this business, scale this business. I did not envisage myself as CEO of X business with an office, managing 40 people in that context.
And with those 40 people dependent on you for their livelihoods.
Exactly.
So I was interviewed years ago for, I think it was a small business magazine. And when I was talking to the interviewer, like my mini epiphany was the thing about working for yourself, entrepreneurship, is the hardest part is waking up and going again. Like regardless of what is going on, every morning you wake up and you go again. And you do that every day. And things could be tough. You want to curl up into a ball, but every day you kind of wake up and you just go again.
And it felt it's dependent on you. This outcome, this output is very dependent on you, you know? Taking it back to what we spoke about at the top of the conversation, when you mentioned and then I mentioned how it's like you want to know the workings of something. You want to understand how this thing is built before you apply yourself to it. That's also part of the reason why I was like, okay, let me go back to school, because I felt like I need to reverse engineer how I did this. I need to understand how I made that money. I need to understand how business works, you know, because I was doing it, but in the same way where I wasn't confident about putting out a novel because I hadn't studied story structure, I also didn't feel confident calling myself a business person because I didn't actually understand in the nuts and bolts.
You didn't get the foundation to it. And you didn't understand even how you'd build it.
Yeah.
You were just, like you're saying, you were just kind of doing.
I was doing things intuitively. I was doing things I'd seen other people do. I was doing the young Google, how do you do X, how do you do Y? But I hadn't understood, you know, how do I build this thing? How do I scale this thing? What are the processes and systems I need to put into place for this thing to run without me? So that's also part of that. Like, let me understand what I was doing here. So again, guys, and so many people, even after MBA, they'll say to me, oh, you know, I'm going to use my MBA to start a business. I'll be like, girl, good luck to you. Good luck.
So what does today look like for you? I mean, you've got the book. So, and you've been pounding the pavement to push the book. I mean, we had an online conversation around the promoting and marketing and building awareness around the book, which I said, I don't know how good I am at any of those things. So I tend to just focus on doing the thing. You know, if you like starting a podcast, start a podcast. You know, people go, how do you market it? I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like, I do a podcast and then I'll figure out the rest later. But I mean, you're with books, you need to kind of catch it while the iron is hot. But it's going to slow down at some stage. What's the plan?
Oh gosh, what's the plan?
Where are you? I mean, you don't have to give me the nitty-gritties, but just in terms of where you are. And like, because you're at this stage, you've also talked about being able to position yourself for open environment. There's the personal, and I've always been fascinated by your relationship, I must say. It's beautiful to watch because it feels like I believe that a marriage is two independent people coming together. It's two circles that are finding enough overlap to work with intent and build a life together. They don't, I have problems with the idea of two becoming one because it feels like one will get swallowed. And the reason why I've enjoyed watching your relationship from a distance, because it does feel like two people have very deliberately kind of gone, there's enough overlap for us to justify stuff, but it feels like you're both living full lives.
Yeah. And that's very important to me, to maintain like the who I am, you know, intrinsically at my core within, you know, the context of a relationship. I'm not a cheerleader for marriage. I'm never going to be a cheerleader for marriage. I think there are many people who will do that. I'm a cheerleader for my marriage.
That's all that's important.
I'm a cheerleader for my husband. Like, but marriage as an institution, I'm not like going around berating people, why aren't you married? You know, that's not my business. Yeah, my relationship is, I can't even explain to you how transformative it's been, because, you know, there are very many things that I will discard along the way when it comes to some of these like motivational speaker types. But if there's one thing Sheryl Sandberg got right, it's when she spoke about like who you partner with as a woman is like one of the biggest career decisions you can make. because so many people are with their biggest ops. So many people are in relationships with their biggest enemies and they don't even know it. I'm very fortunate to be with someone who supports me, who knows how to support me. Let's put it that way. Who understands that like we both go through like seasons. We both have ambitions. We both want to achieve things within our own right, you know, and that requires give and take from the other person, you know? So even in pursuing an MBA, there's so many people who are like, how's your husband feel about you spending all this time on school? Or like, you're never at home. How does your husband exercise? And it's like, firstly, my husband has been through this process in a different context though. He did his MBA probably 10 years before me. But it was never, I was never one of those people who had to race from work home, cook a full dinner, and then race from making sure he has a plate of food in front of him, race to class at 5:30 in the evening, you know? He's a very pragmatic person. I remember when once I was incredibly stressed and we sat down and he's like, let's make a list of absolutely everything that we have going on and let's outsource the non-essential. You know? Take it off your plate completely. Even through the tail end of my MBA, we moved houses and we outsourced the entire process. Like I literally walked into our new house and I was like, okay, the entire thing is furnished. Everything is in place. We got the type of movers who come and pack up your whole house and then get to the other side and unpack everything. He just made everything absolutely seamless for me, you know, and without me having to ask. And that's like the type of partnership that, yeah, like I couldn't ask for anything more.
Yeah.
You know? So I am very protective about it. You can see like I'm very cagey in how I talk about it. I'm very protective about my relationship.
And it's your right.
Yeah.
Like it is your right.
Yeah, because I do things in media. I'm the one who's like promoting books and out here and doing all of these sorts of things. He's not, you know? He's known within his profession. He does his thing within his profession. And I do my thing within my profession. It's just that my stuff a lot of the time is public facing.
But also, I mean, I think that's also sometimes the misconception about when you do stuff public facing, and also the difference or the challenge that comes from the spaces you inhabit. So what I mean is that, so the early days of Twitter, because I joined Twitter quite early.
Yeah, we were there in 2009.
And so when people were coming on, I remember, my first 2 years, because I joined September 2008, and then 2009 I became very active to the point of close obsession. And people used to say, like, how do you deal with having your whole life on Twitter? And I'm like, it's like 5% of my life.
Yeah.
Like I choose. I've been around enough to know that I have the liberty of choosing what I'm going to share. And when I first started getting interviewed by other people, I used to get stressed because I'm like, I always liken it to when I was in high school and you want to ask a girl out. When you want to ask a girl out, you literally plan the entire conversation in your head.
Is it?
Yes. So it'd be like, okay, I'll say this, and then she'll say this, and then I'll say this, and she'll say this. And without fail, her first response
is never on script.
And then it's like an internal collapse. But I found I was doing that in interviews. But when I got to the point where I realized that, first of all, I do not have to answer any question, every question. And I can answer and share what I want to share. Like I'm not beholden to the person asking me questions.
Yeah.
So I'm the person with control over the situation. That for me it changed the way I approached interviews, conversations, etc. And even when I was writing my book, I was very deliberate about what I included because it touched on lives of others close to me. So I was very deliberate, and I did it very consciously, having learned that I can ask you a question and you can be like, actually, do you know what? I'm not really comfortable with answering that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, cool. let us move on, you know? But now kind of closing up. So where are you? Like,
where am I and what's next?
Where are you just mentally, professionally? Because it's the book. We're going to hit June. I know publishers, like, you know, PR departments can only work so much. You're having to do all the work. There's going to be 20 other books that come out. The tension will shift. So, yeah.
I think I said this the other day. I'm always like, I'm a one-day person. One day I'll. And I love nothing more than like fulfilling those one days. So I have a bunch of things on my kind of 2024 hit list that are definitely coming up that are fulfilling those one day aspirations that I'm not necessarily going to dive into. For now, there is going to be a little bit more writing for me. I feel it in the air. I feel it inside my head. The follow up to this book, it's one of 30, like in my mind. Like, you know, there are other story arcs that need to be told within this world specifically. So that needs to get started. I'm not insane enough to say I'm going to start and finish book 2 this year. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. But yeah, a little bit more writing. I do client work. So that's always ongoing, like in the background for me. But yeah, there are a few things that are going to be ticked off that one day list.
How do you find that balance between harmony, alignment, whatever word you want to use, between client work and let's call it personal project? So, I mean, that's my challenge.
Yeah.
So the reason why this podcast has had breaks at various stages is because then client work, you know, like client work overshadows my personal project.
Client work to me has to overshadow the personal projects. Like, guys, Cyril's economy, we need to work, you know? So that's why book 2 has not been put down on paper yet. It's very much still, I'm plotting it out in my mind. I'm a fast writer. So once I put my hands on the keyboard, it'll come. But for now, I'm working out the kinks of the plot internally. In terms of how I balance it, that's my bread and butter. That's my 9 to 5. So that's the core focus, like during the day. I find that my personal projects, whether that's writing or anything else I'm doing, I have to make time for it. Otherwise, I am incredibly frustrated. You know, if I don't feel like I'm applying myself to things that are important to me outside of work, like another big lesson from like my 20s, and I say this to people who are in their 20s all the time, you need to keep a little bit for yourself.
Yeah.
And by that, keep a little bit for yourself, I mean your creative energy, your best ideas, you know? So you need to keep that a little bit for yourself and you need to safeguard that. So I find the time that, again, I'm child-free. That helps a lot, you know? So the 5 to 7 o'clock slot, that's where I'm fitting it in. The 7 to 9 o'clock slot, you know, and not having an all or nothing feeling around those projects. I used to have an all or nothing kind of concept, you know, so it's if I can't clear my schedule and focus 100% on this thing, then it's not a thing that I'm doing. Now it's like I'm a big fan of incrementalism because that's how I wrote these books. I don't wake up with 90,000 words, you know, it's the 1,000 words a day. It's the, I only have energy for 700 today. Oh, you know, it's the, I'm sitting at lunch. Let me quickly just type up a page quickly. So finding those kinds of sorts and believing in the incrementalism and the discipline of the incrementalism definitely helps me move the needle on my personal projects. And it's the keeping a little bit for myself. But, you know, hey, the check is being paid, so I need to focus during the day.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. I just have to say before we close up, you were one of the first people I sat down with when I first moved to Joburg and started my media career in the city. You're one of the first people who was like, let's have a coffee, let's sit and chat. And I've always considered you like one of my big brothers in the industry. So thank you for being you.
Thank you. I do remember those coffees.
Yeah.
The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is produced by Zebra Culture. If you have ideas of what we can do better, people you'd like us to have a conversation with, or would just like to share a thought, you can email me on info@zebraculture.com. To check out past episodes, go to kojobuffer.com/podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, Listen to Your Footsteps, check out kojobuffer.com/book. There are details on the various spaces it's available at. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review or comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, there's the Zebra Culture by Kojo Buffer newsletter, where on a weekly basis, I share a curated list of articles, playlists, videos, etc. that have caught my attention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.